No, I think it's really confusing too to older parents or like now grandparents, because the millennial generation is really focused on introspection and fixing ourselves before we have kids or at the very early stages, so we don't like fuck them up the way that we were fucked up, right? And obviously, right, it's just like, why do I do these things? Are they me? Are the way I was parented? A lot of times they say, if you, like, the way that you react to your kid doing something, if it's this really kind of disproportionate emotion, like your kid, like just the other day, my child took a blue crayon and just drew all over the walls. And I just came out and I was like, did you do that, Art? And he's like, yeah. I was like, okay, well, art's for the easel. Let's go wash that up. Just like that, right? No meltdown, not like, what are you doing, my paint? Which is what I would have gotten and probably worse. So
you've diffused the charge.
Right. But if I had reacted like, what did you do? Look at my paint. That was because I had probably done something very similar at an age. And that was the response I got. It's imprinted. Yeah. So it's like this really cool looking glass that you can have as a parent.
You're talking about the generation gap. How old was your mom when she started looking at her trauma and uprooting these patterns in herself and asking herself the kinds of questions you're asking?
Yesterday, maybe.
Yeah, maybe tomorrow.
Yeah, maybe tomorrow.
Just a different cultural context, which can, I'm sure, make our generations, because I'm 47, so I can't call myself, I wish I could call myself a millennial, but I'm more of a...
You're almost there.
Gen X,
Yeah.
The Breakfast Club is how I learned about teenagehood. That's my reference point. We grew up in a world that was a lot more complicated in some ways than our parents, but also, especially the millennial generation, is growing up in a world where learning about your trauma and doing something about it early is increasingly invited. And this is like one of the good things about the internet, maybe, that this conversation can be piped into homes, like in the 1980s. People were watching Johnny Carson and The Cosby Show. And these days, people are much more likely to be listening to a podcast about trauma, illness, and healing, or something else that actually touches on something vulnerable and difficult, right? Which I imagine for our parents might be kind of difficult. Like these kids these days, they're all about their boundaries. They're, like what's going on? In my day, we just put up with our parents.
Right. And it's like, well, I don't know if all of those things were necessarily good. Like telling your kid, unless you're bleeding or dying, leave me alone. That's not a great message to tell a little person.
Yeah, well, there's our title in action, right? The myth of normal. Things that get normalized become invisible, and we just assume that they're natural. But so many of them are not only not natural, they're making us very sick in many different ways. So that's,
100. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I think that's why people, like you and your father and Joe Dispenza and all of this work being done with epigenetics is so powerful, because it's like if you aren't allowed to express yourself, which a lot of us weren't, feelings were very discouraged because they were inconvenient, then your body stores on to those things. I wanted to ask you, I've got like pages, but usually I don't even get to them. One of the things I wanted to ask, I was watching this podcast with Jordan Peterson the other day, and it was a clip, and he was talking with his daughter, Michaela, and it was like Jordan, his wife, and Michaela. And I believe the quote was something along the lines of, we never let you behave in a way that that made us not like you, something like that. And then he's like, oh, it was so great. We could take you to restaurants and you would just sit there. And then Michaela was like, yeah, my daughter Scarlett is the same way. She can sit at a dinner for 2 hours and not make a peep. And I was like, what does that mean? Behave in a way that I don't like you? Because certainly if my kid's hitting me, that's not allowed. That's not okay. So I feel like there's got to be something in between this gentle parenting or conscious parenting, whereas oftentimes more than not just passive absentee parenting, like I'll let you do whatever you want. Permissive parenting, yeah.
Which doesn't help the child at all.
No, because then there's no bumpers on this bridge, right? Like where is my safeguard? Am I safe? Who's in charge? It kind of creates a whole other can of worms. But then also saying, well, you little tyrant, I'm going to go lock you in your room is not good either. So where is that happy medium? Like what does healthy parenting look like in that scenario?
Well, for me, look, I have to be very conscious here that I'm not a parent.
Yeah.
So, anything I say about parenting is by definition me talking out of my ass. And I don't love quoting my dad too much because I'm not him, and plenty of Gabor content on line that people can find, but let me see what I can say about what you said. Jordan Peterson, we take some shots at him in the book. Not him, but especially his parenting. We have a lot to say about his particular approach to parenting. Now, I have a complicated, I come from the sort of liberal left side of the cultural divide, or whatever. I don't really identify with any one part of it, but in terms of where I grew up, where I live, who my friends are, and all that. And Jordan Peterson is kind of a joke there, right? And I did kind of impersonate him and did kind of his little Canadian Kermit voice for the audiobook.
Oh, did you?
I did it lightly, So that quote, basically the thing he said on the podcast, he's written,
Mm-hmm.
I would never, and he says at one point, and we quote it in the book, I forget what it is, but like I could shut my daughter up, or I could basically shut her down with a withering glance. And he's proud of that.